In a quiet southern town where whispers of racial tension lingered just beneath the surface, 14-year-old Maya Johnson was simply trying to get home after a long day at school. She had her earphones in, listening to music, and wore her favorite hoodie, a gift from her grandmother, to shield herself from the chilly autumn breeze. But as she walked through a predominantly white neighborhood on her usual route, something felt off. A police cruiser slowed down beside her, its tires crunching against the gravel. Two officers stepped out, their expressions stern. "Hey you," one of them called out sharply. "Stop right there." Maya froze, confused. Had she done something wrong? She pulled out her earphones and turned toward them. "What's going on?" she asked timidly, clutching her backpack straps tightly. The officers didn't answer immediately. Instead, they exchanged glances before approaching her with an air of suspicion. One of them pointed at her sweatshirt. "Why are you wearing that hood? Trying to hide your face?" Maya blinked, taken aback. "No, sir," she replied softly. "It's cold outside," the second officer scoffed. "Cold or not, this isn't your area. What are you doing here?" Her heart began to race. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned why she was walking through this part of town, but it was the first time she'd been confronted by police. "I live nearby," she said, gesturing vaguely in the direction of her house. "I'm just heading home." But the officers weren't convinced. They demanded to see her ID even though she was too young to carry one. When Maya explained this, one of them grabbed her arm roughly and spun her around, snapping handcuffs onto her wrists. Tears welled up in her eyes as she protested. "I didn't do anything. Why are you arresting me?" A neighbor across the street noticed the commotion and started recording the scene on their phone. Through the lens of the camera, the world saw what Maya endured, one officer yanking her sweatshirt off while the other mocked her for crying. "Stop acting like a victim," he sneered. "You are acting suspicious. Don't play innocent." Word spread quickly once the video hit social media. People watched in disbelief as Maya, still in her school uniform, pleaded for understanding. Comments flooded in from all over the country. Some expressed outrage, calling the officers' actions blatant racism. Others defended the police, claiming they were only doing their job. Regardless of opinion, one thing was undeniable. The footage painted a disturbing picture of how power could be misused. For Maya, the ordeal didn't end when she was finally released to her mother's care later that evening. The humiliation of being treated like a criminal lingered, leaving her shaken and afraid. Her mother, Angela Johnson, hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "This shouldn't have happened to you," she whispered fiercely. "We're going to make sure they pay for this." As news outlets picked up the story, pressure mounted on local authorities to take action. Protesters gathered outside the police station holding signs that read, "Justice for Maya," and chanting slogans about ending racial profiling. Meanwhile, Maya stayed indoors, avoiding the spotlight as much as possible. All she wanted was to forget the incident ever happened, but deep down she knew it wouldn't be that easy. Little did she know her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The video of Maya's arrest spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Within hours, it had millions of views, and hashtags like #Justice for Maya and End Racial Profiling began trending nationwide. The footage showed everything: the rough way the officers handled her, the mocking tone they used when speaking to her, and the sheer terror in Maya's eyes as she begged them to let her go. Viewers were outraged. How could anyone treat a child this way? People couldn't stop talking about it. Angela Johnson, Maya's mother, was overwhelmed by the attention but determined to fight for her daughter. She sat down with lawyers, community activists, and even reporters who reached out to her, hoping to turn this painful moment into something meaningful. "This isn't just about my daughter," Angela said during one interview, her voice trembling, but resolute. "This is about every black child who has been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. We can't keep letting this happen." Meanwhile, the local police department tried to downplay the incident. In a press conference, the chief of police claimed that the officers followed protocol and acted based on reasonable suspicion. But many weren't buying it. Protesters gathered outside the station daily, holding signs that read "Protect Our Kids" and "Accountability Now." Some shared stories of their own encounters with law enforcement, saying Maya's experience wasn't unique. It was part of a much bigger problem. As public pressure mounted, the district attorney announced that charges would be filed against the two officers involved. They were accused of misconduct, excessive use of force, and falsifying reports. According to the complaint, the officers had written in their report that Maya resisted arrest and threatened them, claims that directly contradicted what was shown in the video. This blatant lie infuriated people even more, fueling calls for justice. For Maya, the sudden spotlight felt suffocating. Reporters camped outside her house, hoping to get a statement or snap a photo of her. Classmates whispered about her at school, some offering support while others seemed uncomfortable around her. Even at home, there was no escape. Every time she turned on the TV or opened her phone, she saw herself, her tear-streaked face, her shaking hands as strangers debated whether she deserved what happened to her. It made her feel small, like she wasn't a person anymore but a symbol in someone else's battle. Her family did everything they could to shield her from the chaos. Her older brother, Marcus, stayed glued to his laptop, monitoring news updates and flagging hurtful comments online. Her grandmother cooked her favorite meals, trying to bring some comfort to their disrupted lives. And Angela kept reminding Maya that none of this was her fault. "You're brave," she told her daughter one evening, brushing her hair back as they sat together in silence. "Even if you don't feel like it right now, you are." But despite the love surrounding her, Maya couldn't shake the weight of it all. She started having trouble sleeping, replaying the arrest over and over in her mind. What if she hadn't taken that route home? What if no one had filmed what happened? Would anyone have believed her side of the story? Amidst the turmoil, something unexpected happened. Messages of support poured in from all over the world. Strangers sent letters, drawings, and care packages to encourage Maya and her family. A local artist painted a mural of Maya with the words, "Strength and Truth" beneath it, turning a blank wall downtown into a beacon of hope. For the first time since the arrest, Maya felt a glimmer of light breaking through the darkness. Still, the road ahead was uncertain. With the charges officially filed, the case moved toward trial. Everyone knew the courtroom would be packed, not just with lawyers and witnesses, but with supporters, critics, and journalists eager to see how justice would play out. As Maya prepared for the next chapter of her journey, she clung to one thought. Maybe, just maybe, her story could help change things for the better. When the case landed on Judge Evelyn Harper's desk, whispers of anticipation rippled through the community. Everyone knew her name. Judge Harper wasn't just any judge. She had built a reputation for being fair but firm, unafraid to challenge the status quo when she believed justice demanded it. Known for her sharp mind and commanding presence, she carried herself with an air of authority that made people sit up straighter in her courtroom. And now this high-profile case involving Maya Johnson was hers to oversee. As Judge Harper reviewed the evidence, her expression grew increasingly troubled. The video of Maya's arrest played repeatedly on her laptop screen, each viewing making her angrier than the last. She saw the fear in the young girl's eyes, heard the dismissive tone of the officers, and noted how quickly they resorted to force without cause. But what struck her most was the blatant contradiction between their written report and the undeniable truth captured on camera. These officers weren't just guilty of misconduct, they were lying under oath. Judge Harper knew this trial would be about more than punishing two individuals. It was an opportunity to send a message. Racism and abuse of power couldn't continue unchecked. Yet she also understood that simply handing down a standard sentence wouldn't resonate deeply enough. People needed to feel the weight of what had happened, not just hear about it. That's when an idea began to form in her mind. One bold, enough to make even her pause for a moment. She called her clerk into chambers late one evening, the dim light casting shadows across her desk. "I want you to prepare something unusual," she said, leaning back in her chair. Her clerk raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. Judge Harper explained her plan. During sentencing, she would order the officers to physically escort Maya to the center of the courtroom, make her kneel before them, and apologize directly to her face. It was unconventional, dramatic even, but Judge Harper believed it would expose their hypocrisy in a way no lecture ever could. The clerk hesitated, clearly uneasy. "Your Honor, are you sure this could backfire? Some might see it as too harsh." Judge Harper leaned forward, her piercing gaze locking onto her clerk. "Sometimes we have to push boundaries to get people to listen. If these officers can humiliate a child without remorse, then perhaps experiencing a fraction of that humiliation themselves will open their eyes, and everyone else's." Word of the upcoming trial spread quickly, drawing national attention. Reporters speculated endlessly about what Judge Harper might do. Would she side with Maya and her family, or would she bow to pressure from those defending the officers? Speculation ran wild, but no one could predict the twist she had in store. Even Maya and her mother, Angela, didn't know what to expect. When they arrived at the courthouse on the day of sentencing, the atmosphere was electric. Protesters lined the streets, outside, holding signs and chanting slogans. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension, every seat filled and cameras rolling. As Judge Harper took her place at the bench, her demeanor was calm but unmistakably stern. She glanced around the room, taking in the sea of faces watching her intently. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine the ripple effects this decision could create. Not just for Maya, but for communities everywhere grappling with similar injustices. Then, with quiet resolve, she signaled for the proceedings to begin. Whatever happened next, she thought, would leave a mark nobody would soon forget. The courtroom was silent, save for the faint rustling of papers and the occasional click of a camera shutter. All eyes were fixed on Judge Evelyn Harper as she adjusted her glasses and began delivering her verdict. Her voice carried a weight that silenced even the most restless spectators. "This case," she began, her tone measured but firm, "is not just about two officers who abused their power. It is about accountability, respect, and the dignity owed to every individual, especially a child." She turned her gaze toward the two officers standing stiffly beside their attorney. Their faces were pale, beads of sweat forming on their foreheads as they realized this wasn't going to be an ordinary sentencing. Judge Harper recounted the evidence piece by piece. The video showing Maya's arrest, the lies in their written report, and the lasting trauma inflicted on a young girl simply trying to get home. Each word felt like a hammer striking its mark. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Judge Harper paused, letting the tension build before announcing her decision. "You will both personally escort Maya Johnson to the center of this courtroom," she said, her voice cutting through the stillness. "There you will make her kneel before you and offer a direct apology, not to me, not to the court, but to her." Gasps rippled through the room. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others leaned forward, eager to see how the officers would react. For a few agonizing seconds, the officers stood frozen, their expressions a mix of shock and defiance. One of them opened his mouth as if to protest, but a sharp glance from Judge Harper stopped him cold. "Do I need to remind you," she added coolly, "that failing to comply with my orders constitutes contempt of court?" The threat hung heavy in the air. Reluctantly, the officers nodded and moved toward Maya, who sat between her mother and lawyer, visibly trembling. Maya hesitated when they approached, gripping her mother's hand tightly. Angela gave her a reassuring nod, whispering, "It's okay, baby. You're strong." With slow, reluctant steps, the officers led Maya to the center of the courtroom. One of them gestured awkwardly for her to kneel, avoiding eye contact. Maya complied, her heart pounding as she knelt on the cold floor beneath the watchful eyes of dozens of strangers. "Now," Judge Harper commanded, her voice ringing out like a gavel strike. "Apologize." The first officer swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He stammered, "I'm sorry for what happened." His words lacked sincerity, trailing off into an uncomfortable silence. The second officer followed suit, mumbling something barely audible. Neither looked at Maya directly. Instead, they stared at the floor, their shame evident despite their attempts to mask it. The courtroom remained eerily quiet, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing every detail. Protesters outside might have cheered at the sight of these men humbled, but inside, the mood was somber. This wasn't entertainment. It was a reckoning. Judge Harper studied the scene carefully, her expression unreadable. She seemed satisfied that her order had been carried out, but there was something else brewing beneath her calm exterior. Something no one saw coming. As the officers stepped back, preparing to return to their places, Judge Harper raised a hand to stop them. "Wait," she said softly, yet with authority that demanded attention. What happened next would leave the entire courtroom and the nation speechless. As the two officers stepped back, relieved that the awkward ordeal seemed to be over, Judge Harper's voice cut through the tense silence once more. "Wait," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. The officers froze mid-step, their faces pale and confused. Everyone in the courtroom leaned forward, sensing that something unexpected was about to unfold. Judge Harper rose from her seat, her robe flowing behind her as she walked slowly down from the bench. Her movements were deliberate, commanding attention, without a single word. She stopped at the edge of the courtroom floor, her piercing gaze sweeping across the room before settling on the officers. Then, with calm authority, she addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I asked these officers to make Maya kneel, not because I wanted to humiliate them, but because I wanted them to understand what they had done." The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. No one dared to breathe too loudly as Judge Harper continued. "When you forced this child to her knees during her arrest, you did it without hesitation, without remorse. You treated her like a criminal when she was guilty of nothing more than existing while black." Her words landed like thunderclaps, echoing off the walls of the packed courtroom. Then, Judge Harper turned her focus directly to the officers. "But today, when I ordered you to make her kneel, you obeyed immediately. Why? Because someone in power told you to do it. And yet when you held all the power over Maya, you showed her none of the respect or dignity you expect for yourselves. That hypocrisy is what we are here to address." The officers' faces flushed red, their discomfort palpable. One of them shifted his weight nervously, glancing at his partner as if searching for support. But there was none to be found. They stood exposed, their actions laid bare for everyone to see. Even the defense attorney looked away, unable to meet the judge's steely gaze. Judge Harper wasn't finished. She gestured toward Maya, who still sat quietly between her mother and lawyer. "Maya is 14 years old, 14. She deserves to walk home without fear of being targeted because of the color of her skin. She deserves to live in a world where people in positions of authority protect her, not harm her. What you did to her wasn't just wrong, it was cruel. And cruelty cannot go unanswered." At that moment, Judge Harper signaled to the bailiff, who handed her a stack of papers. With measured steps, she returned to the bench and began reading aloud. These documents contained evidence not only of the officer's misconduct during Maya's arrest, but also patterns of similar behavior in other cases involving young people of color. The details were damning. False reports, excessive force, dismissive attitudes, all pointing to systemic issues within the department. By the time Judge Harper finished speaking, the officers looked like they'd been struck by lightning. Their earlier defiance had melted into visible shame. One of them hung his head low while the other stared blankly ahead, his jaw clenched tight. The courtroom erupted into murmurs, some people nodding approvingly, others whispering in disbelief at the revelations. For Maya, the moment was overwhelming. She clutched her mother's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness this time, but of relief and vindication. For months she had carried the weight of that day alone, wondering if anyone would believe her story. Now, here was a judge, a figure of immense authority, standing up for her in front of the entire world. As Judge Harper concluded, she addressed the officers one final time. "You may leave this courtroom today, but remember this. Accountability doesn't end here. Your actions have consequences, Not just for yourselves, but for the community you swore to serve. Perhaps now you'll think twice before abusing your power again. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, signaling the end of the proceedings. As the officers were led out of the courtroom, their heads bowed in defeat. The audience erupted into applause. Some cheered loudly, others wiped away tears, and a few simply sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Outside, protesters chanted louder than ever, emboldened by the justice they had seen served inside those walls. What happened next would ripple far beyond the confines of the courtroom, sparking conversations about race, power, and accountability that would echo for years to come. The moment Judge Harper's gavel struck the bench, signaling the end of the proceedings, the courtroom erupted into a cacophony of reactions. Some spectators clapped and cheered, their applause filling the space with a sense of vindication. Others sat in stunned silence, processing the gravity of what they had just witnessed. Reporters scrambled to capture every detail, their pens flying across notepads as cameras flashed incessantly. Outside, the chants of protesters grew louder, echoing through the courthouse halls like a wave of collective outrage and hope. For Maya, the whirlwind of emotions was almost too much to bear. She leaned into her mother's embrace, trembling, as tears streamed down her face. This time, though, they weren't tears of fear or humiliation, they were tears of relief. For months she had carried the weight of that terrible day alone, doubting whether anyone would truly believe her story. Now, here she was, surrounded by people who had stood up for her, a judge who had spoken truth to power, and a community that refused to stay silent. It was overwhelming but also deeply healing. Angela Johnson held her daughter tightly, whispering words of encouragement. "You're brave, baby," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "What happened today isn't just about us. It's for every kid out there who's been treated unfairly because of how they look." Her words resonated with those around them, many of whom nodded in agreement. In that moment, Maya realized something profound. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. Her story had become a symbol of resilience, a rallying cry for justice. But not everyone shared this sentiment. As the officers were escorted out of the courtroom, their faces, flushed with shame and anger, murmurs of dissent rippled through certain corners of the room. A few supporters of law enforcement grumbled under their breath, accusing Judge Harper of overstepping her bounds. "This is why people lose respect for the courts," one man muttered to his companion. She made it personal. Outside, opinions were equally divided. Social media exploded with debates about the trial. Supporters praised Judge Harper's boldness, calling her ruling a long-overdue wake-up call for systemic racism within policing. Critics, however, argued that her methods were excessive, claiming that public shaming wouldn't solve deeper societal issues. News outlets ran headlines like, "Judge takes justice into her own hands" and "Court's gone too far," fueling heated discussions across dinner tables and online forums. Despite the backlash, Judge Harper remained unfazed. When approached by reporters after the trial, she addressed the criticism head-on. "Justice isn't always comfortable," she said, firmly, standing tall before a bank of microphones. "If we want real change, we have to confront uncomfortable truths." These officers needed to feel even a fraction of what they inflicted on Maya, so they, and everyone watching, could understand the impact of their actions. Her words struck a chord with many, especially those who had experienced similar injustices. Across the country, communities began organizing rallies inspired by Maya's case, demanding reforms in policing practices and greater accountability for misconduct. Schools held discussions about racial profiling, encouraging students to speak out against discrimination. Artists created murals honoring Maya's courage, while musicians wrote songs celebrating her resilience. What started as a single incident in a small southern town had ignited a nationwide movement. Back home, Maya struggled to adjust to life after the trial. The spotlight hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had grown brighter. Strangers approached her at the grocery store thanking her for being brave. Teachers praised her during assemblies, calling her a role model. While she appreciated the support, it sometimes felt suffocating. All she wanted was to go back to being an ordinary teenager, to focus on schoolwork, hang out with friends, and forget the world was watching her every move. Her family did their best to shield her from the pressure. Angela limited interviews and turned down invitations to appear on talk shows, determined to protect Maya's mental health. Marcus, her older brother, stayed vigilant, monitoring social media to block hurtful comments. And yet, despite their efforts, reminders of the trial lingered everywhere. Every news segment, every protest sign, every mural bore her name, a constant reminder that her life had changed forever. Still, amidst the chaos, Maya found moments of peace. Late at night, when the house was quiet, she'd sit by her window and write in a journal her grandmother had given her. She poured her thoughts onto the pages, capturing both her pain and her hopes for the future. One entry read, "I didn't ask for any of this, but maybe it happened for a reason. Maybe my story can help others feel less alone." As weeks turned into months, Maya began to see glimmers of light breaking through the darkness. The shockwaves from Judge Harper's ruling continued to ripple outward, sparking conversations and inspiring action. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. Maya's voice had been heard, and, in the weeks following the trial, the town became a battleground of opinions. Judge Harper's ruling had ignited a firestorm, dividing the community into two camps: those who saw her actions as a bold step toward justice and others who believed she had overstepped her role. The debate raged not just locally but across the nation, with news outlets hosting panels of experts, activists, and critics to dissect every detail of the case. For a small southern town that preferred to keep its struggles tucked quietly beneath the surface, this level of attention was both uncomfortable and unavoidable. On one side of the divide were the supporters, people who cheered Judge Harper's unorthodox approach and viewed Maya as a symbol of resilience. Protesters continued to gather outside the police station, their numbers growing as word spread about the systemic issues Judge Harper had uncovered. Signs reading, "Accountability starts now" and "Justice for every child" dotted the streets. Community leaders organized town hall meetings to discuss racial profiling and police reform, urging residents to channel their anger into action. Schools even began incorporating lessons on civil rights and social justice into their curriculums, inspired by the conversations sparked by Maya's story. But on the other side were those who felt Judge Harper had gone too far. Some argued that her methods amounted to public shaming, which they claimed did more harm than good. "You don't teach someone a lesson by humiliating them," one local resident told a reporter during an interview. Others defended the officers, insisting that their actions were justified under the circumstances, even though evidence proved otherwise. A small group of counter-protesters showed up at rallies, holding signs that read, "Support our police" and "Stop attacking law enforcement." Tensions ran high, with verbal confrontations occasionally breaking out between opposing sides. Amidst the chaos, Maya found herself caught in the middle. Though she appreciated the support from strangers, the constant scrutiny weighed heavily on her. At school, some classmates treated her differently. Some admired her courage, while others seemed uncomfortable around her, unsure of what to say. Even walking down the street felt surreal. People recognized her face from the news and often stopped to offer kind words or hugs. While their intentions were good, it made her feel like she could never truly escape the shadow of that day. Her family worked tirelessly to shield her from the worst of it. Angela Johnson gave only a handful of carefully chosen interviews, using each opportunity to turn the focus back to the broader issue of racial injustice rather than her daughter's personal trauma. Marcus kept a close eye on social media, blocking trolls and reporting harmful comments before they reached Maya. And yet, no matter how hard they tried, there were moments when the weight of everything became too much. Late at night, Maya would lie awake, replaying the trial in her mind, wondering if things would ever go back to normal, or if they should. Despite the challenges, positive changes began to take root. The local police department faced mounting pressure to address the patterns of misconduct Judge Harper had exposed. State officials launched an investigation into the force's practices, leading to calls for body cameras, implicit bias training, and stricter accountability measures. Similar movements sprang up in neighboring towns, with citizens demanding transparency and fairness from their own law enforcement agencies. Judge Harper's ruling had struck a nerve, forcing communities to confront uncomfortable truths about race, power, and privilege. For Maya, the turning point came during a quiet evening at home. Her grandmother visited, bringing along a photo album filled with pictures of their family through the years. As they flipped through the pages together, her grandmother stopped at a picture of Maya as a toddler, grinning ear to ear with ice, cream smeared across her cheeks. "You've always been strong," her grandmother said softly. "Even then, you didn't let anything hold you back." That night, Maya decided she wouldn't let fear control her anymore. She picked up her journal and wrote a new entry, vowing to use her voice, not just for herself, but for others who might feel silenced. Slowly but surely, she began stepping into her role as an advocate, speaking at local events and sharing her story with anyone willing to listen. It wasn't easy, but it gave her purpose, a reason to keep moving forward despite the scars. As the town remained divided, one thing was certain. Maya's case had opened a door that couldn't be closed. Again, whether people agreed with Judge Harper's methods or not, the conversation had started, and there was no going back. Months after the trial, the impact of Judge Harper's ruling continued to ripple outward, shaping not just the small southern town where it all began, but communities far beyond. The two officers involved in Maya's arrest faced severe consequences. They were fired from the police department and later convicted on multiple charges, including falsifying reports and excessive use of force. Their case became a cautionary tale for law enforcement agencies nationwide, prompting many to reevaluate how they trained officers and handled complaints of misconduct. In the wake of the scandal, the local police department underwent sweeping reforms. Body cameras became mandatory, and footage was required to be reviewed regularly by an independent oversight committee. Implicit bias training sessions were introduced, led by experts who challenged officers to confront their own prejudices and understand the importance of treating every individual with dignity. The changes weren't perfect. Some residents remained skeptical, but they marked the beginning of a long overdue shift toward accountability. For Maya, life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. Though she would never forget the trauma of that day, she found strength in the knowledge that her courage had sparked meaningful change. She started speaking publicly at rallies and community meetings, sharing her story with a mix of vulnerability and determination that inspired listeners of all ages. Her speeches often ended with the same message: "No one should have to go through what I did. But if my voice can help even one person feel less alone, then it was worth it." Her advocacy caught the attention of national organizations fighting for racial justice. Maya was invited to join campaigns aimed at ending systemic racism and empowering young people to speak out against injustice. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking still made her nervous. But with her family's encouragement, she embraced the opportunity. By the time she turned 15, Maya had become a recognizable face in the movement, featured in magazines and documentaries about youth activism. Yet despite the growing recognition, she remained grounded, always reminding herself why she was doing this work, not for fame, but for fairness. The mural painted downtown became a symbol of hope for the town. Artists added to it over time, incorporating images of other young activists and messages of unity. People visited from neighboring cities to take photos in front of it, leaving notes of gratitude or solidarity pinned to a nearby bulletin board. For Maya, seeing her likeness immortalized alongside words like courage and change filled her with pride, but also humility. She knew she wasn't the only one fighting for justice. She was simply part of a much larger effort. Years passed. The town itself began to transform. Conversations about race and privilege that once simmered beneath the surface were now openly discussed in classrooms, churches, and city council meetings. New leaders emerged, young voices determined to build a more inclusive future. Even some former critics of Judge Harper softened their stances, acknowledging that while her methods may have been unconventional, they forced people to confront uncomfortable truths. Judge Harper, too, left a lasting legacy. Known affectionately as the judge who shook the system, she inspired others in positions of power to think creatively about how to deliver justice. Law schools included her, ruling in their curriculums, using it as a case study on bold leadership and moral responsibility. When asked about her decision during a rare interview, she smiled softly and said, "True justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing, it's about teaching lessons that lead to growth. If we want a better world, we have to demand better from ourselves." For Maya, the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were days when old fears crept back, moments when she questioned whether she was strong enough to keep going. But each time doubt surfaced, she remembered the faces of those who cheered her on, the strangers who sent letters, the classmates who stood by her side, the activists who welcomed her into their ranks. They reminded her that she wasn't alone. By Dio. The time she graduated high school, Maya had grown into a confident young woman with a clear sense of purpose. In her valedictorian speech, she thanked everyone who had supported her along the way, from her family to Judge Harper, to the countless strangers who believed in her. Then she closed with these words, "We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. And if we stand together, there's no limit to what we can achieve." Years later, when people looked back on the case of Maya Johnson, they didn't just see a girl who knelt in a courtroom. They saw a spark that ignited a movement. It was proof that even in the darkest moments, courage and resilience could shine brightly enough to Lei.